Hi everyone, today we're going to be doing a Chopin bio video. Before we get started, I'd just like to ask that if you've been finding these videos interesting and helpful, to give us a thumbs up and subscribe. We're a young channel and every like counts in a really big way. So here is our composer of the day, Frederick Chopin. Born in 1810, died in 1849, so a fairly short life here. Chopin was born in Żelazowa Wola in Poland to a Polish mother and a French father who had moved to Poland to tutor French for wealthy children. Chopin, that is, showed great interest and talent for music at a very young age and was actually compared to the likes of Mozart. His first published work was Polonaise in G minor, which, if you're a pianist, you may have encountered in grade 7. At the Warsaw Conservatory, Chopin took lessons with Joseph Elsner and also studied Polish folk music while spending summers in rural Poland. Chopin, like his father, made friends with many aristocrats and would play in their salons. These gatherings were made up of wealthy women, many who would later support Chopin's career in Paris. Before moving to Paris, however, Russia invaded Poland while he was on tour in Vienna. The RCT etude, nicknamed Revolutionary, was probably written during that time. Chopin subsequently settled in Paris in 1830 and was able to meet important musicians such as Liszt and Berlioz, the latter of whom we'll discuss in a separate video. He was also influenced by artists and writers such as Victor Hugo and Heinrich Heine. Chopin began composing more nationalistic works such as mazurkas and polonaises, which originated from his homeland of Poland. So nationalism in music. An important element of 19th century musical style, nationalism in music can be understood as patriotism being expressed through music. Practically, this is typically achieved through the influence and use of folk song and dance, myths and legends, landscapes, and historical events of the country in question. Now, you have to be aware that we're using this definition for the sake of this RCM exam, and that nationalism and patriotism are not the same thing. Nationalism, as it's defined by the New Oxford American Dictionary, is, quote, identification with one's own nation and support for its interests, especially to the exclusion or detriment of the interests of other nations, end quote. Whereas patriotism is defined as, quote, devotion to and vigorous support for one's country, end quote. While some composers use cultural influences in their music for the purposes of creating musical propaganda, not every composer does. Just because a Canadian composer throws in a maritime fiddle tune theme into their music doesn't make that composer a nationalist. Of course, there's a lot of nuance to this, and we often don't know what composers were thinking when they use cultural influences within their music. Yes, there's times when that influence is being used for nationalistic ends, but unless we, on a balance of probabilities, know that was the composer's intention, I believe it's more appropriate for us to characterize such influences as precisely that, cultural influence. From 1830, Chopin once again made a living through the support of aristocrats, but mainly through teaching and composing. He's said to have hated performing publicly since he was just so introverted and shy. And there's a rumor that he was so embarrassed asking his wealthy students for money that he would always look away when they gave him the lesson payments. However, he would continue performing in small salon settings just for his patrons and students. Unlike many composers, Chopin's love life was pretty simple, maybe because he died quite young. He was first engaged to Maria Wodzinska, who was an aristocratic Polish artist. One copy of the Farewell Waltz is dedicated to her, actually. However, her parents didn't approve of this engagement as Chopin was just always so ill. Chopin began a relationship with the novelist Aurora Dudevant, who used the pen name George Sand. Now, these 10 years that they were together were the happiest and most productive of his life, but health was always a source of concern. In the later years, George Sand complained that she was more of a nurse to Chopin rather than his partner, and they ended up breaking up in 1847. In April of 1848, in the midst of the Paris Revolution, Chopin traveled to England and Scotland. He gave concerts there organized by his student Jane Stirling. His last concert was a benefit concert for Polish refugees in London's Guildhall. He was so sick that he would die a couple of weeks later on the 17th October 1849 at just the age of 39. Now, if you look at your screen, you might be confused as to why there are two tombs. Well, Chopin's body is buried in Paris, which is what he wished. However, his heart is buried in Poland, in the Church of the Holy Cross, again at Chopin's request. Next time we're going to be taking a look at Chopin's musical style and contributions. Thanks for listening.